Thanks very much. So, part 2 of evidence-informed decision-making, using information or not. So I'm Jonathan Underhill. As Neil talked about in the first part of this is not a complicated problem, it's a complex problem. So what I want to do is address how we might help a little bit overcoming some of those complexities, particularly around how we manage information overload and then how we go about keeping up to date. So just a reminder about what Neil was talking about in the first part. System 1 tends to dominate our thinking. System 2 takes effort, so we don't like that status. Once we've seen a pattern, it's very, very difficult to forget about that pattern. And even if we try really, really hard, our affective biases will beat it out of us and make it really, really difficult to overcome that, sometimes anyway. So, managing information overload. I'm sure we can all recognise this poor chap here. The amount of information that's out there is overwhelming. Getting information from the internet has been likened to trying to drink water from a fire hydrant. It's very, very difficult to contain that flow of information. So if you ask people, and you ask clinicians how they stay up to date, most people will say, well, I try and read journals, I try and read clinical papers, and I read guidelines and things like that. This is a picture of Val Fitch from Princeton University. Val Fitch was a professor of physics. He had the brain the size of a gas planet. Very, very intelligent man. What he's got here is the equivalent of Index Medicus for the physics world, so Index Physicus. That's the complete, all the research that had been done in physics around the 10-year compilation of research in physics. The 1900s, 1910, 1920, which goes down a bit because of the First World War. 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. By the 1980s, Val needed to get someone from the basketball team to stop him being crushed by the books. His point here was, even though he had the brain the size of a gas planet, there was no way he could keep up to date with everything in the world of physics. This is before the internet, before the information explosion. As Neil said, there is no way that we can keep up to date by reading. If we try and read, there are about 10,000 potential journals. Even if you filter out the ones that aren't relevant, and you took 15 minutes to read each article, spent 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, will give you a day off on Sunday to do the things you need to do on Sunday. You'll only get to read 240 articles. You can see where this is going. At the end of the first week, you're 4 weeks behind in your reading. First month, you're 4 months behind in your reading. And the first year, you're 5 years behind in the reading, and you haven't seen any patients. You've been reading. So you end up with a guilt stack, where you see a paper, and you think, oh, that's really interesting, I'll read that, and you never get time to read it. So you end up with a guilt stack. If you do nothing else as a result of this lecture, when you get home tonight or tomorrow, back into the office tomorrow, throw away your guilt stack. Do something different. Organise your CPD in a different way. What about things like journal clubs? How many, show of hands, how many have a journal club where you'll have an article and you'll discuss it with colleagues on a regular basis? A couple of people say that they do that. Right, okay. Imagine we're having a journal club and it's the year 2000. I give this half of the audience this paper by Hopman Rock, okay, and the other half of the audience this paper by Petrella. So this is looking at the effect of exercise on pain and osteoarthritis, okay? This is a forest plot. Basically what this means is that if the line crosses this line of no difference, then there's probably no statistically significant benefit from that intervention. Whereas if it's on this side, there's a fairly large effect size. So the conclusions drawn from reading the Hockman Rock paper by this side of the audience would be exercise doesn't do much for osteoarthritis. And yet the other side of the audience, having read this paper by Petrella, published in the same year, would legitimately conclude that exercise is really, really beneficial in osteoarthritis. So, ping pong, what do we do? Well, actually the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Exercise does a bit for osteoarthritis. So what we need to do is look at the context of the rest of the evidence, not just read single papers on their own. And if we just read guidelines that come from NICE and the Royal Colleges, this is a really, really good quote from the Lancet from 2005, where they estimated it would take about 122 hours just to be up to date for one single medical take on call. 122 hours just reading the NICE guidelines and the stuff from the Royal Colleges. We need to think smarter about this. David Sackett, evidence-based medicine guru, back in 1996, estimated that clinicians, so you're seeing patients, you've got about an hour a week to devote to staying up to date, maybe 2 if you're lucky. And he called this the golden hour. How do we use our golden hour in the best way? So, is there a better way? Better as possible. It doesn't take genius, it takes diligence, it takes clarity of purpose, it takes ingenuity, it takes, above all else, a willingness to try. So how do we go about keeping up to date then? Remember what Neil said about how people make decisions. This impinges on this massively. Okay, bounded rationality, you can only make the perfect decision when you've got all the information. So all of our decision making is going to be imperfect. And we can't even remember a simple list of words. There's no way we can keep up to date with all the information that's out there. Dual process theory, system 1, system 2, and our decisions are informed by brief reading and talking to other people. So it would make sense to have a system that works with that rather than works against it. You need a system for keeping up to date. There's 3 things you need. You need a system for hunting when you get stuck, finding the best answer, the best possible answer as quickly as possible. Foraging, a system where you're alerted to important new information that's been put into the context of the rest of the evidence, and importantly requires you to think about a change to your practice. And hot syncing. So in the same way that we plug our iPhones into iTunes, other phones are available obviously, but and you synchronize that with your computer and press the button, it synchronizes what's on your phone with what's on the computer. We need to do the same thing with our brains. We've seen that we make decisions based on what's in our brains. We need to make sure that what's in our brains, every so often, is in line with the latest guidance, the best available evidence. And for the 30 to 40 conditions that we see most frequently, not the things that interest us, but the ones that are our caseload as clinicians. Okay, so just thinking about that, this is Prof. Slawson and Prof. Shaughnessy's information pyramid, where essentially you start at the top, looking for an answer to a clinical question. Start at the top. If you find an answer in the Cochrane Library or in NICE, where they've critically appraised the evidence, they've summarised it and they've produced a guideline, and it answers your clinical question, you can stop there because that will be the best answer to your question. If you can't find an answer there, you go down to an evidence summary, either from clinical evidence or CKS or other sources like that. Then and only then would you do a search on, reading Ivy League journals. You wouldn't go to Medline until it was a last resort to answer a clinical question. What happens in practice is that people get taught about how to use Medline. Do a Medline search, end up with 4,000 hits and go, which one do I use? Do you use the one that comes to the top? Or do you just pick one at random? What do you do? Much better to start at the top and work your way down rather than the bottom and work your way up. So for hunting, it's about finding the best answer, not just an answer, finding it easily and quickly when we need to, and importantly, recognising it when we found it. So what's the criteria? Again, the genius of Slawson and Shaughnessy here. The usefulness of information is a product of both relevance, validity, and the amount of effort that it takes. So if you find a piece of information and the relevance is 0, the usefulness is going to be 0. Likewise, if the validity is 0, the usefulness is going to be 0. But it's an inverse proportion to the work. So that's why it's much easier for us to phone a friend or ask a colleague, because the work required there is low. Therefore, that helps with the usefulness. But if what they tell us isn't relevant or valid, then it's not necessarily useful. So relevance, so we can filter out relevant information actually quite easily, and we'll talk about how you might do that in a minute. Validity is a much more difficult thing to do. It involves critical appraisal of studies, and if you don't do critical appraisal often enough, because, for example, you're seeing patients, those skills that you've acquired maybe by going on a critical appraisal course will deteriorate over time. You need to be doing this regularly to be able to assess validity, or get someone else to do it for you. So, how do we filter for relevance? There's a mnemonic you can use here, and you have to be careful how you say this in certain places. I remember saying it in Northern Ireland once and nearly getting into trouble. It's the FOC mnemonic. So, feasibility, the outcomes, is it a common condition, and does it require me to change my practice? So, these are the criteria that determine relevance. So, feasible intervention, there was a paper in the BMJ about 6 years ago, talking about a really effective intervention for depression. It was swimming with dolphins. So, swimming with dolphins is a really effective intervention for depression, but there's not a lot of access to that sort of intervention in North Staffordshire. If you live in New Zealand, there might be, but there's no point in reading that paper because it's going to have no bearing on your clinical practice. Outcomes, so patient-oriented outcomes or disease-oriented outcomes. What we're interested in here are the patient-oriented outcomes. So, if this is true, is it going to make my patient live longer or live better? So, does it reduce heart attacks and strokes? Does it reduce my risk of having diabetic foot ulcers? Does it reduce my nighttime awakenings when I have asthma? Not necessarily does it reduce my blood pressure. Does it improve my HbA1c? Does it improve my peak expiry flow? It might do, but if it doesn't do these things, as a patient, I'm not interested because it doesn't make me live longer or better necessarily. So for relevance, you can filter out those articles, those pieces of information that don't measure patient-oriented outcomes. If it's not a common condition, there's no point in you reading that article, because by the time you see a patient, it'll be 2 years' time, and you won't remember what that article told you, or what that piece of information told you. And if it doesn't require you to change your practice, well, other than a sort of a sense of well-being, that knowing that your practice is still up to date, you don't have to read that article because you're already doing it. It doesn't require you to change. So, another example of disease-oriented outcomes and misleading us is this one. So if I presented this information to you and said, right, there's an intervention that produces a 72% increase in HDL cholesterol, which is a good thing. It produces a 25% decrease in the LDL cholesterol, again a good thing, and a 9% decrease in triglycerides, again a good thing. You'd probably think, ooh, this is an interesting intervention that I'd be interested in prescribing for my patients because I want to do the best for my patients. However, within the same paper, when you look at the patient-oriented outcomes, it increases the risk of death by 25%, giving you a number needed to harm of 83. For every 83 patients treated with this intervention, one of them had this bad thing happen to them. It also increased all-cause mortality by a significant amount, with a number needed to harm of 250. This isn't made up, this is torcetrapib, the development of which was discontinued in 2007. There was a fantastic editorial that went alongside this about how if this drug had been licensed on the basis of disease-oriented outcomes, the consequences of that might have resulted in real harm to patients. So we need to be really careful about accepting information based on disease-oriented outcomes. And the really, really empowering thing here is that if anyone presents you with some information that fails the relevance test, you get to say the best 7 words ever. The best 7 words ever are, I don't know and I don't care. So a colleague presents you with some information. It can be a specialist, it can be a pharmaceutical rep, it can be a summary of evidence that's been presented to you and it fails the relevance test. I don't know and I don't care. So after you've done the relevance thing, which is actually quite easy, what about validity? Much more difficult to do. These are the sorts of things that we need to be looking at, so spotting the fatal flaws here. So, Is it a high level of evidence? Is it statistically significant? Is it clinically significant? Do you understand what the numbers tell you? Are you numerically literate to be able to understand absolute and relative risk and number needed to treat? This isn't critical appraisal necessarily. This is just understanding the language of validity. In order to do that, to actually assess validity in a proper way, you need, as I said before, you need to get people who do this for a living to do it for you and provide it to you in a way that you can understand it. Remember Neil's slide from the first lecture, some quotes from GPs saying, I'd love to be able to do critical appraisal. I remember doing it in medical school, but I just don't have the time. And actually I get frustrated because I can't do it, because I don't have the time to do it. So what do we do instead then? Do we just give up? Well, no, because there are pre-digested sources of evidence from trusted sources. And here are just some of them. These are the ones that I personally find quite useful. The key thing here is these 4 criteria, that these pre-digested sources must be based on a public sector ethos, where there's no overtly commercial gain to be had from the appraisal of that information. I think you know what I'm saying there by saying that. Also importantly, we need to know how they've done this. What's the methodology that they've used to produce this summary of evidence? Do they translate the evidence into practice as well? Do they suggest what we might want to do as a result of this information, rather than just leaving it hanging? And also, I'm not interested in one paper on its own. We saw that with the ping pong from the osteoarthritis papers, didn't we? What we need to do is say, what does the rest of the evidence say? What does the NICE guidance say on this? And does this piece of information affect that in any way? Muir Gray, again, a fantastic quote here, talking about clinicians of now and of the future. We're not going to be valued for how much we know. We're going to be valued for being skilled at locating the relevant and valid data for their needs, and also applying it to populations who are lonely and anxious and have come to seek your help. Not for what we know, but for what we do with that knowledge, with that wisdom that we have. And that's very much in line with the tenets of evidence-based medicine that we talked about in the first lecture. So what do we do with this then? What's the best use of a clinician's golden hour? Well, radical stuff here, but if you're a clinician, it's different if you're doing research and you're doing it for academic purposes, but if you're a clinician seeing patients, give up on reading primary research. You don't have the time to do it, and you won't be able to critically appraise it, not unless you do that for a living or do it very often. Design your CPD on these principles. Have a system for foraging, an evidence awareness service that you can access, 2 or 3 articles a week that's been appraised for you, summarised, set in the context of the rest of the evidence. Hot sync your brains 2 or 3 times a year for the 30 to 40 common conditions that you see. So, new NICE guidance comes out, have a journal club, discuss the NICE guidance with your colleagues, or at your local practice forum, or at your network meetings or whatever. Take time to digest it. Talk about the implications of this for your practice. Don't argue about whether or not they've got the guidance right, because these people know what they're doing much better than you do. Talk about the applicability of it to your practice. What are the important changes since I last updated my brain with this? What are the things that I need to work with here from a sort of bounded rationality point of view here? And only for the conditions that you see commonly. Hunting is much more difficult. We're getting better at systems for being able to find the best answer quickly. Things like TRIP, really, really good database for finding appraised evidence quickly. NICE evidence as well. Use the information pyramid that I showed you before. Those principles apply here. Again, what we're hoping to do at the Keele Centre for Medicine's Optimisation is, use those principles. We're going to be providing people with a service that helps prescribing teams keep up to date with important new evidence. Summaries 2 to 3 times a week, set in the context of the rest of the evidence. That's what the evidence says. That's what Neil's just talked about in terms of how we make decisions. So we want to build on that and provide that service to our prospective clients. An educational outreach program. Educational outreach we know is an evidence-based intervention that does change practice. We saw that with the diclofenac example before. Nothing happened with the publication, the passive dissemination of information. Nothing happened. The only time that people started changing their behaviour was when prescribing teams went out and saw the whites of prescribers' eyes, talked them through the story repeatedly and went through it with them and developed a relationship with them. That's educational outreach. That's what we need to get really, really smart about doing in order to enable our workforce to do medication review properly, target those at-risk patients who require medication review. So we're going to be providing education materials to allow people to do that, to hot sync their brains with the latest evidence when it comes out. And we're also going to be supplying people with a support network so they can discuss problems, talk about the applicability of the latest guidance to their practice, share good ideas, share what worked well when they were talking to prescribers, or perhaps what didn't work so well when they were talking to prescribers as well. Like-minded people sharing good and bad experiences. Okay, last 6 questions. This is, I think, one of the most important things that we can think about around decision making and how we can make a real difference to this. So, get your piece of paper out again. I'm going to give you 6 questions to answer. You've got 10 seconds for each response. Okay, you ready? Okay. On a fire engine, there's 2 engines up front, 1 at the rear, and 4 additional firefighters. What's the total personnel required for 5 standard trucks? The clock's counting. Okay, how many turtle doves did my true love send me on the 2nd day of Christmas? In 2008, the average time required to complete a root cause analysis was 15.5 hours. How much time should be allowed for the 3 that are expected next month? Okay, question 4. A bat and ball costs £1.10 in total. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? It takes 5 machines, 5 minutes to make 5 widgets. How long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? Last question. In a lake there's a patch of lily pads. Every day the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? Okay, time up. Okay, answers. Who wants to be brave and say what was the answer to the first question? How many fire personnel did you have written down? 30. How many? 30. 35 is the right answer on that. 7 times 5? 35. There's 2 turtle doves. And it's 46.5 hours for the time analysis. 3 times 15.5. Those 3 questions were just there just to kind of make sure you were still awake. They're not really important. The important ones are these ones here, because these are a test of your cognitive reflection. How well you reflect in real time when you're under pressure. Who wants to be brave and shout out the answer to this? 5p. Was that your... I've got some looks of consternation here. Who says 10p? Okay, if it's 10p and the bat costs £1 more than the ball and the total is £1.10, that can't be right. The answer's 5p. But your initial intuitive answer is 10p. If it takes 5... What was the answer to this one? Your intuitive answer is 100, isn't it? The real answer is 5, because it's still the same number of widgets and same numbers of machines. And in a lake, Your intuitive answer is 24, isn't it? It's not, it's 47, because it doubles every day. So don't feel bad about that, because what you've done there is just you've gone with your intuition rather than thinking about thinking. And what this test does, this is Shane Frederick from MIT, who did this in 3,500 very, very bright students in MIT. Okay? So don't feel bad if you didn't get them all right, or even if you got them all wrong, because a third of the brightest and best students in America also got all 3 of those questions wrong. Because what it does, it distinguishes between your intuitive system 1 thinking and your ability to reflect and to calibrate and to toggle into system 2 and think about thinking. That sort of metacognition thing. And it's your ability to resist that at first initial gut response. It's a cow. It's not a cow. It's just some black ink on a white background. It's not Margaret Thatcher. It's just a picture of Margaret Thatcher. So, our best single hope for reducing errors is thinking as well as blinking. Okay? Every decision we make, whether it's a really, really quick decision or one that requires more time, every time we do that, we must think as well as blink. So, am I sure about this? Yeah, I am. Right, okay, fine. There's actually some good evidence to show that calibration thing really, really helps with reducing error rates. So, what we need to do is put signs up on wards saying stop and think. Because it kind of makes you stop and think when you do that. So better is possible. As Neil said, knowing about decision making means improved decision making. The feedback system, if you remember about the card game, the feedback on the cribbage app. Getting feedback's really important, and being open to feedback's really important as well. And modifying your decision making on the basis of feedback is really important. Being self-aware, that metacognition, being in the right system at the right time. Sort out your information management. You can make a difference to this complex problem. You won't solve it, but there are things you can do to make it easier and better for you. And we need to think about thinking as well as blinking. And we need to start teaching people about thinking as well as blinking on undergraduate and postgraduate curricula. I'd like to leave you with the magic words of Peter Kay, who said, knowledge is knowing tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not putting tomato into a fruit salad. So, thanks very much.